I'm here today to continue our series that we started last week in the book of Philippians. And I'm going to get to that, but I want to open up with a question. If this is you, kind of raise your hand, let me know. How many of you have ever put together one of those 1,000-piece puzzles? You know the ones I'm talking about. You know, they usually sit on your dining room table for 3 weeks, right? It's just you're like, why did we do this? And if you've done that, you know one of the more frustrating things in life is when you finally get to the end of this puzzle and you're like, all right, one more piece. Where is it? Anybody? And it's like you're missing that piece that you spent all this time putting this puzzle together. It is so frustrating. Isn't that the worst? Because in that moment, you're not like, oh, well, you know, it was fun. No. What you do is you go, okay, here's what we're doing tonight. All hands on deck. We're going to find this piece. And you spend the evening on your hands and knees with a flashlight, and you're combing through every square inch of your house trying to find this piece so you can complete it. And even when you don't find it and you give up, it doesn't leave here, does it? Like you're supposed to be sleeping, and you're just like, where's that piece? I just don't understand. Did somebody, break into my house and steal it? Did it vanish? Where did it go? So frustrating. But how many know the other feeling that whenever you do get to put in that last piece of a puzzle? Oh, isn't that the best? It's like one of the most satisfying things ever to just put it in, and you just look at this puzzle, every piece working together to create this masterpiece. And it brings so much joy to my heart. Some of you are like, you care more about puzzles than I do, Pastor Kirby. That's fair. But for some of you, you get that feeling when you look at a painting or a picture or a work of art where all the colors and all the shapes and all the images, they just kind of come together in such a perfect way, and it brings joy to your heart. Others of you, maybe you're a musical person and it's a song or a symphony, and it's just, when you hear something where all the parts and the movements, that they are just in such harmony together that it just moves you to the very core of your being. For those of you that maybe you're a sports person and you have a team that you follow, and you know that feeling that you get when you see your team just on the same page and they run the play with such teamwork and they're in unison together, and it brings you joy to see something like that. And you see, that's the power of unity. There's a beauty that's found in unity. And this power, this beauty is meant to be one of the defining qualities of the church. And that's really what Philippians chapter 2 is all about. If you weren't here last week, Pastor Daniel did a great job opening up this series, didn't he? And he talked about how joy is really the theme of the whole letter. Because everywhere you look in each chapter, Paul is just almost overflowing with joy. But what makes this stick out even more is the fact of where Paul was writing this letter. He was writing it while chained up in prison, and yet Paul was able to say, I have so much joy. And we began last week by talking about the joy of community. Well, in chapter 2, Paul paints this picture of the joy of unity. And I think that most of us would agree that there is a joy in unity, right? I mean, I think very few people you're going to find would say unity is bad, right? I mean, nobody really says that. People are like, unity is good. It's a good thing. We want it. We seek it. We work hard to try and get it. The problem is that unity is difficult, right? I mean, can we just admit that right off the bat, that unity is not easy. It's hard, and it's complicated, and it's inconvenient a lot of the time. In fact, maybe, when you really think about unity, if we're honest, it often feels impossible, doesn't it? I feel that tension a lot. Do you feel it where it's just how are we going to ever achieve something like this? And one thing that helps me feel a little bit better about that is that this is not just a tension that we feel today in 2024, but this has been a tension that the church has faced its entire existence, right? The early church experienced the struggle of trying to be unified. You see, it was common for Christians back then, just as it's common for Christians today, to really, really, really dislike each other. And you see, the church in Philippi, who Paul is writing to, you got to understand this is not a big, happy family and everybody's getting along and working together. Well, how do I know that? It's because they're people, right? I know that because we're people, and they experience the same things we experience. They had conflicts, and they had problems, and they had relational dysfunction. They fought, they argued, they didn't always agree, and just like us today, that's where they were, which is why Paul addresses this tension in Philippians chapter 2. So let's read it. It says this, it says, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion," in other words, like if you're serious about following Jesus in really any way, he says, "then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind." Paul says, you know what would bring me so much joy? Unity, right? Like-mindedness, togetherness, being one in spirit. And the thing is, if there was ever a teaching that felt upside down in our culture today, this would have to be it, right? I think most of us would agree that we live in an incredibly individualistic culture. Would you agree? Where no matter where you look or who you look to these days, everyone seems to be looking out for numero uno, okay, right? It's just like, I got to hustle to make a name for myself, and I've got to climb this ladder because nobody's going to do it for me, and I got to show everybody how great I am. I need to self-promote to show how great I am, all in the name of individuality. And I don't know if this is like super conscious, but there's this air of if it doesn't benefit me, then it's not important. It's just not, because in my world, in my perspective, in my view, right, it's all about my way. It's my truth, my agenda. My success is more important than anybody else's success, right? My opinion is the only one that matters. My thoughts and feelings, they're the only ones that are valid. My comfort is more important because it's all about me. And you see, this by default, it suffocates unity, and it causes division. And we know all about division. I grew up, when I was a teenager, I shared a room with my brother Micah, my younger brother, about a year and a half younger than me. We shared a room for several years, and as you can imagine, there was some fighting happening, right? We weren't always in unity together. And I remember there was a couple of big blow-ups, one of them in particular, and I don't remember what we were fighting about, but I do remember our decision. We just decided, you know what? For now on, like you stay on your side of the room, and I'm going to stay on my side of the room. This is mine, that's yours, and we don't get on each other's sides. And we were so serious that we found some like blue painter's tape, and we put it across the carpet, and we actually drew lines, and we even put it up the wall, and anything that was against the wall, we split that down the middle. It went up a desk, it went up a lamp, like, you know, this side of the light is yours, and that side of the light is mine, and you don't get on my side, right? It was division. And that's what division does. It separates us from one another. It puts up this wall between us. And the truth is, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, because we experience separation all the time. Some of you, maybe here in person or watching online, you have estranged family members, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. It might be the whole family reunion that we don't talk anymore. We're not close anymore, all because of some past disagreement, past argument. You may not even know or remember, but it's just like we're separated. There's a wall there. Maybe there's distance between you and your spouse because of some past issues, some past disagreement, and you never really fully dealt with it. And time has gone by where you don't necessarily feel it anymore, but there's this very real hurt and bitterness that has lingered. Could be years. And you try your best to kind of keep things civil, and you're polite to one another, and you're respectful. But I'm telling you, all that undealt with stuff, it's created a wall. And it has affected your intimacy. Maybe you used to have a really good friend, maybe even a friend at this church, and you two were so close, but now it's awkward and it's distant. All because there was some issues, some arguments, some problems, some hostility that was just never dealt with. It was never reconciled. Forgiveness never happened. We never sat down and let's work this out. That never happened. And now there's distance. There's a wall. I'm sure if I passed around the microphone, we could be here all morning, right? All day, just sharing example after example of how division created some kind of a wall in relationship. Because we see this play out all the time. But I think in our most honest of moments, don't we have to admit that all those walls and all that division and all that separation, it's affected our joy? It just has. Paul says as much in verse 2. He says, then make my joy complete, meaning it's incomplete. And we're, okay, Paul, how do we make your joy complete? By being like-minded, by having the same love, by being one in spirit and of one mind. You see, what Paul is saying is crystal clear. He says, if you belong to Jesus, you are united into one community of believers. And so this solo approach to following Jesus that you see today every once in a while, where I'm just going to follow Jesus on my own, in my own way, at my own pace, and I don't need to commit myself to anybody else. It's just me and Jesus and me. I don't know where we got that idea, but that is not what the Bible teaches. Because when you decide to follow Jesus, and you just need to know this, those of you that you're not following Jesus yet, but you're deciding, you're seeking, you're not sure, you need the full picture. Is that whenever you decide to follow Jesus, you're not just joining yourself to Christ, you're joining yourself to his body. See, that's what the Bible calls the church. All of us, we're actually one body. We're so many different parts, but we're together. We're one. And the Bible tells us that from that point forward, when you join yourself to that body, there is no more separation. There are no more walls. Jesus kicked them down through his work on the cross. They don't exist anymore. There's no more animosity, no more suspicion, no more bitterness, no more division, no one group thinking of themselves as better than another group. That doesn't happen anymore, because from now on, we're going to be united together as one. Why is that? Well, because Jesus brings us together. He doesn't drive us apart. This is what the church is. It's not a group of individuals. It is one unified body. And the result of that is an undeniable, you can't explain it away. It's supernatural. It's this joy that you just experience and receive, and it's a joy that God created all of us to experience. And so the question is, how do we get there? And if we get there, how do we stay there? Well, this is what Paul addresses in the rest of the passage. And I'm just going to warn you that right from the get-go, Paul doesn't pull any punches. So verse 3, he says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. I mean, there's not a lot of wiggle room for interpretation. It's not in the Greek, that means, no, he just, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Don't do it. It says very clear. And this is tough for me. It's probably tough for you if you think about it, because I'm naturally selfish. I don't know about you. I just am, especially when it comes to my food. Anybody like me? I don't want to share my food ever. I'm that way. I remember Danielle and I, my wife and I, when we went on an early date. You're not going to believe this. She suggests that we should share an entree. I'm like, are you nuts? What? Why? Why would I ever do that? I'm not sharing my food at all, right? And I'm still this way, unfortunately. When I take my kids out to McDonald's, you know how when you're pulling the food out of the bag, the fries that fall to the bottom of the bag, those are my fries. Nobody gets those fries, they're mine. I'm a little selfish with that. I'm selfish with candy especially. You guys are getting an inside look at the foods that I eat. But I'm kind of selfish with candy. I don't like to share it. In fact, I think this is one of the reasons, my favorite candy is black licorice. Anybody like black licorice? Yeah, very few of you. And that's probably the reason why it's my favorite, because I don't have to share it with anybody. Nobody wants it. It's good, more for me. I'm naturally selfish, but this is true of all of us in one way or another. Unchecked, we're all going to drift towards selfishness. And Paul tells us, he says, look, unity and selfishness, they don't survive together. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, but I just want to focus on that word humility for a moment. Because in my opinion, this word humility is one of the most misunderstood words in Scripture. Because that word humility in our world today, and honestly, really throughout all of history, it's been viewed as weakness. Like humility equals weakness, because humble people, I mean, they're the ones who get run over. They're the ones who get overlooked. They're the ones who get taken advantage of. And that's how humility is typically viewed in our culture. It's a weakness. But humility is not a weakness. Let me explain what humility is. It is a gentle, disciplined, and controlled spirit. That's what humility is. It's the strength of restraint. That I'm not going to give in to my emotions. I'm just going to hold back. I'm going to restrain myself. And the greatest example we have of this is Jesus himself. Listen to how Paul describes him. Verse 5, he says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. So the idea there is that Jesus, he didn't selfishly cling to his divine privilege or his divine right. In other words, he did not come to earth in the outward glory and the power and the prestige and the fanfare that you'd expect God to come in. But instead, Jesus he takes a completely different direction, and he willingly lays all of that aside, and he makes himself nothing. Now, does that sound like weakness to you? I mean, to be God and have every right to walk in your divine nature, but instead you choose not to cling to the advantage of being God? I mean, can you imagine the strength and restraint needed? Listen to verse 8. He says, being found in appearance as a man, Jesus humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. I mean, to humbly go through what Jesus went through on the cross, that's going to take some strength of restraint. Like, just think of the trial. I think about this every once in a while. Like, the night Jesus was arrested, just the trial part, like, that trial was a joke. I mean, it's like they pull Jesus out in the middle of the night. They put together this kangaroo court. They're rushing through everything. They're not doing everything the way you're supposed to do it. They like arrange for people to bring these false testimonies. They mocked him. They spit on him. They slapped him in the face. And yet through all of that, the Bible tells us that Jesus doesn't argue. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't expose their lies. You ever heard somebody lie about you? How hard it is to not defend yourself? He doesn't do that. The Bible tells us that Jesus remained silent with an unwavering restraint. And he does this, you can read it, all the way to the cross. And you may wonder, well, why didn't Jesus defend himself? Well, it wasn't because he couldn't, but it was because in that moment he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about you. He was thinking about me. He was thinking about every single person that he was about to lay his life down for. That's what was on Jesus' mind. You see, the humility of Jesus is not weakness. It's quite the opposite. In fact, it shows how strong and in control Jesus really was. And so we have to get this picture out of our head of humility being this weak, lowly person being taken advantage of, because that's not who Jesus was, and that's not who he's asking you to be either. The humility that Jesus modeled, this is a quality of people who could demand their own way. They could domineer. They could step over others to get ahead in life, but they choose not to. Not because they don't have any other options either, but because they are full of the unstoppable, unquenchable, unconditional love of God. And Paul tells us that this was the attitude of Jesus, and this is the attitude that paves the road to unity. A group of people so committed to love one another that they genuinely put other people first. They're quick to forgive. They have grace for others when it's hard. They honor and encourage and build others up. I'm telling you, there is such a joy that comes from that kind of unity. And this is who Jesus calls us to be. And so what does this look like in a practical sense? Like what does it look like to be humble? How do we bring this in into a Monday morning, right? What does it look like? So I quickly want to give you 3 qualities of a humble person. I think this is going to be I think it's going to be helpful for you. The first one says this: humility sees others. Humility sees others. One of the things that I love most about Jesus was no matter how busy he was or what was going on in his life or how focused he was on his mission, he always took time to see people. Like everywhere Jesus went, he saw people. Let me ask you, do you see people? I mean, that's a question, it's a heart-revealing question that we've got to ask ourselves every once in a while, don't we? Do I see people? Let me just make it even more uncomfortable and ask it another way. Do the people around you in your world, do they have souls? Like, does the waitress who's about to take your order this afternoon, does she have a soul? Or does she just exist to take care of your needs? The barista who prepares your coffee every morning, does he have a soul? Or does he just exist to get you your coffee so you can get to work on time? Your neighbors, do they have a soul? Your kid's teacher, does she have a soul? Your boss, some of you are like, no, no, my boss has no soul. Believe me, I've looked into her life and she's void of soul. Okay, but what about your coworkers? Do your coworkers have a soul? The girl who slides your cart at the gym, the guy who delivers your groceries, the one who picks up trash at work, do these people have souls, or do they just exist to take care of your needs? I have a friend who went to lunch with somebody at the time he really looked up to, and it's just kind of an awkward, embarrassing story because he sat there and they got into the restaurant, and the first thing that the man did, he was much older than him, somebody he looked up to, he lined quarters across the edge of the table. And when the waitress got there, he explained to her that this is your tip, and you get to decide how much of it you keep. And all throughout the lunch, when his drink was empty, he'd slide away a quarter. When he tried to wave her down, she didn't see him, he'd slide away a quarter. Every time she made a mistake, he'd slide away a quarter. And my friend just sat there completely humiliated for this girl because this guy did not see his waitress as a person at all. He didn't treat her with dignity or respect. In his mind, she didn't have a soul. She just existed in that moment to serve him. And I know, like a story like that, every one of us is thinking, what a jerk. Like, who would ever treat somebody like that? I would never do that. And I believe it. I hope you wouldn't. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, like painfully honest, that is the way we see the world a lot of the time. And I don't think it's always on purpose. I think it's more unconscious than conscious a lot of the time. But we have a tendency to view life as if it were a movie about us, right? I'm in this with you. Like where I'm the main character. I'm the star. The camera is focused on me, and everybody else in the movie, well, they're just like the supporting cast placed there to make me look better. And when that doesn't happen, what happens? We get angry. We feel disrespected. Because everybody exists to make much of me. And we get so frustrated because they're supposed to provide for me. They're supposed to honor me. They're supposed to exalt me. And no one else has a soul but me. And yet my prayer for all of us, myself included, is that the words of Paul would echo deeply in our soul. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Humility sees others. You know what else humility does? It serves others. Now, we don't typically think like this because I think for the most part, we're thinking not what's best for other people, but what's best for me and my family. And we put ourselves first a lot of the time, but Jesus teaches the complete opposite. In fact, one of his most famous statements in Matthew 20:28. He says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And not just in this instance, but all throughout his ministry, he tells these guys following him, just as he's telling us that, look, if you're going to be part of God's kingdom, if you're going to follow me, you need to know where it's going to take you. And it's not going to take you to the front of the line. It's going to take you to the back of the line, serving everyone else along the way. Because that's what God's kingdom is. It's about others first in his kingdom. And I know off the bat, that sounds like a really bad thing, like, oh, that's going to be very hard. But believe it or not, this is how God wired us. You see, there is something about serving others in the name of Jesus. I don't quite understand it or why this happens, but it happens. It awakens joy in us. It fills us with purpose and fulfillment when we serve other people in the name of Jesus. This is why serving is such a big part of Chapelhill Church. It's why we're constantly banging on about Dream Team. Some of you are like, I'm so tired of hearing about the Dream Team, and you're going to hear more about it, by the way. Because it's not because we're so desperate and we need people to join this team. Please, please, please join our Dream Team. No. It's about making your dream come true. It's for you, because every single one of us were created with a unique design to serve the people of God, right? To serve one another. And what comes out of that is purpose and contentment and fulfillment. And I'm telling you, Jesus has this for you. He wants this for you. He created this for you, but you will not find it at the front of the line. You will not find it trying to get ahead in life. You're not going to find it in self-promotion. You're going to find this at the back of the line, serving others for the glory of Jesus. This is what humility does. It sees others. It serves others. And lastly, as the team comes up, humility loves others. And this word love, it's one of those words that's really easy to say. Like, I love you. That's easy to say. But how much does it cost you to really love somebody? How many know love is costly? It's not cheap. It's not easy. Love comes at a great cost. It's emotionally, personally, relationally, even sometimes financially expensive. This is the reason that love seems to open us up to pain and heartache that we don't experience when we don't give our love away. Why is it that the people that we tend to love the most tend to hurt us the most? It's because love is costly. I'm telling you, it's not cheap, it's not free, it's going to cost you something. And if you haven't heard anything yet, I've been working all morning to get to this one point right here, so please listen to this. As costly as love is, as expensive as love is, it is far less expensive than a divisive church. It just is so less expensive than a divisive church. Have you ever been part of a church where people claim to love God, but they don't like each other at all? It's the worst. It's expensive. It's such a poor witness for Jesus. And so maybe the question isn't, what does it cost me to love others? Maybe the better question is, what did it cost God to love us? You know what it cost God to love us? It cost him the life of his son. Like, think about that, not in the cliche way that we say it a lot of the time, but think about it. It cost God the life of his son. It cost Jesus his divine privilege. He became like us in the form of a servant for the ultimate purpose of living a selfless, obedient life, all so that he could die a selfless, obedient death. What did it cost God to love us? It cost him everything. And perhaps this is why Paul wrote all of this down, because he understood that when we can see the cost of the love that Jesus gave us, we would become so rich in love that in comparison, it doesn't seem all that expensive at all to love other people anymore. Jesus changed the world through selflessness. He changed my world. He changed many of your worlds. And listen, he can do it again. It can change. Selflessness can change the world again. But only if we as the church choose to walk in unity, humility, and love. Will you pray with me? Jesus, I pray for something that is so dear to your heart. Jesus, I know right now you're sitting at the right hand of the Father and you are praying for this. You're praying for unity, that we would experience the supernatural joy that comes from a united church. You prayed it, Jesus. You said, may they be one as we are one. Lord, I pray that we as a church would function the way you designed it to function, being of one mind and of one spirit and on the same page and working together and loving together. And it doesn't mean that we're all the same or we don't ever disagree, but we are united together as one. Lord, my heart aches for those here today, those watching online, who are experiencing relational division, maybe in their family, maybe in their friendships, maybe in their marriage. And I just pray, God, that no matter how long this has been going on, I pray that reconciliation would happen. Yeah. Jesus, I pray that you would give us the gift of conviction this morning, because maybe we don't even think about it anymore and it just doesn't quickly come to our mind, but will you show us the areas, the relationships where we've put up a wall? And Lord, I pray, God, that we would make things right, that there would be forgiveness, that there would be healing, that there would be freedom in our relationships. Lord, I pray that you would produce a humility in us that would be so noticeable to this world, that the way we treat each other and serve one another and love one another and the way that we follow Jesus as one, that would draw people to Jesus. Because that's not of this world, that kind of unity. And Lord, I pray that unity would make the gospel of Jesus Christ so clear, and do it through us. Do it through Chapelhill Church. We want that, Jesus. We love you. In the name of Jesus, amen.